Welcome to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba. It's been my esteemed pleasure to have Joel Ross, the Ross Rant, on the show again today. Joel, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm glad to have you here. All right, we got a few things to talk about today: the economy, what's happening with the stock market, Europe, what's going on with Harvard, and the election. So, why don't you start us off with the one thing that's comes to your mind with the economy first?
Well, the economy, if you look at all the numbers, continues to be excellent. If you saw the numbers, I guess it was today, the number of jobs available is 7.1 million, which is far more than the number of people available to go to work. So there's still a very strong labor market, which means wages will continue to be moving up a little bit. So far, it doesn't seem to have really impacted inflation, because inflation is still 1.92%, depending upon how you're counting. And that's probably not going to change very much for a while, because I notice oil's back down to 71.30 or so. The 10-year is sitting still around 3.1.5 or something like that. And tariffs have not really made that much impact. And Walmart today said that they were going to eat some of the tariff so that prices don't go up much. And I presume other retailers will do the same. The Chinese will do the same in order to keep up business. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the tariffs are going to make all that much difference. Maybe a little bit. So inflation probably is going to stay reasonably under control. The Fed will raise again in December. Maybe they'll raise again in March, or maybe they'll wait another quarter. We'll have to see. But overall, if you look at earnings that are starting to come out, things are really doing great. And there's no reason to believe that's going to change for at least 3, maybe 4 or 5 more quarters. After that, it's too far out to really know.
Okay, all right. I'm thinking that the way the landscape looks, because fundamentals generally are lagging indicators from what I've been able to see, that my thoughts are we are going to get a nice rally out of this pullback that we've had, but I'm not sure it's going to last more than 2 weeks. We still have to see how that happens, how that rolls out. It seems to me there's something looming on the horizon that we don't all know about yet. But let's take that as it may for now. We do have a bounce underway. Let's see if it continues and get some legs under it. You have something to say, unless there's more you want to talk about on the economy before we move into Europe.
Yeah, well, all I can say is that a lot will depend on the election in November. If the Democrats do get control of the House, and they start this absurd impeach Kavanaugh, impeach Trump. First of all, they can't do it.
Yeah.
But if they start that, and they start just stopping everything Trump's trying to do, then, that could affect the economy. It could affect the stock market. I happen to believe that the Republicans are going to hold the House by 1 or 2 seats.
Okay.
And if that happens, I think the market continues to do well, and we avoid the ridiculous political chaos that would happen if the Democrats get the House. I don't think there's any question the Republicans add to their seats in the Senate, and that's a good thing.
I get it. I'm kind of a technical analyst. You're a fundamentalist, but I'd love to talk to you about this stuff. A 50% pullback would take us to 2837 on the S&P market. So I'm not so sure we would get maybe beyond the 2859 in the next 2 weeks. So we'll see how it pans out for that. Tell me about what's going on in Europe. I'm sure everybody wants to know how that's panning out over there. There's stuff there that we need to talk about.
Well, Italy, as you know, has a new government, and they've passed a new budget. And the budget breaks the rules of the EU. And the EU Commission has said you can't do what you're planning to do because you're going to have big deficits. And that's not going to work And the Italians are saying, we don't really care what you say in Brussels, we're going to do it anyway. And it's this populist movement that's been going on. And so they're setting up quite a confrontation. And Italy is not Greece. Italy is much, much more important than Greece. At the same time, you have Brexit, which looks like it'll probably get worked out, but not totally clear yet. And at the same time, the EU still has to work out its problems with Trump on tariffs. But assuming the tariff thing gets worked out, which is highly likely, assuming Brexit gets worked out, which is probable now, Italy is still a huge problem, because if they go ahead doing what they're going to do with the budget, then their bonds become pretty much unsaleable except to the EU, to the ECB. Mm-hmm. If the ECB says, well, we're not going to buy your bonds anymore, then nobody buys Italy's bonds, so they can't finance the deficit. But then what happens is the banks in Europe who are holding all the existing bonds from Italy suddenly have much less value of their bonds. They've got a big problem. The ECB then has to decide, are they going to come in and bail out the banks that they just created a problem for? It's kind of a bad situation for the EU. At the same time, Merkel's coalition partner just suffered the biggest loss they've ever suffered in 70 years in Bavaria. And so how much longer Merkel continues in office is questionable. And there may be a new election anytime soon. I don't know how elections work in Germany and when they call a new election, but certainly the coalition is falling apart. And the Greens, and I think it's called the AfD, which is the right wing. So we got the left wing and the right wing coming to more power. But it's more of the same populist kind of thing that's been going on. So the Italians and the Hungarians have kind of teamed up. Now you got a right wing government in Austria and in Poland. And you're getting a lot of pushback against the EU in Brussels. And the political uncertainty is just growing, and the financial uncertainty is growing. And if Merkel goes, that's a huge chaotic situation, because essentially she's run the EU for 14 years, because Germany has really run the EU.
Right.
So I don't know what's going to happen, nor does anybody else. And that's a lot of uncertainty. And as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't invest in the EU stock market, EU assets, or EU anything right now, because I don't see any good scenario for quite a long time over there. So that's a very high risk scenario, in my opinion.
I would agree. Their economies are far more fragile than most people in the United States that I know of really give them credit for. We've kind of gotten complacent with this last 9-year rally here. So if it's good here and I can't see it from my house, then why worry about it? But I think that there is a bigger problem over there than most people want to admit, and we probably get caught flat-footed if we don't pay close attention to it. Not even bringing in what's happening in Asia. There's something going on in Harvard you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, there's a lawsuit that began yesterday at Harvard where the Asian students are suing because they were discriminated against in admissions. And there seems to be quite a bit of evidence that that's true. Harvard almost admits it. Their admissions director, or admissions dean, apparently, I'm only reading this, so I don't know otherwise, but was on the witness stand, may still be on the witness stand, and said, well, we're following the Supreme Court direction that race can be a factor. The problem is that the data show that it's much more than just a factor. So the SAT scores of the Asian kids are the highest, and yet they get replaced in terms of acceptance by Black kids and Latino kids who have 200 points less in the SAT scores. And Harvard says, well, their personalities didn't fit the kindness ratio, and there was something else. Well, we all know what that really means. So it's going to be quite a historic case. based on what I read, and I don't know anything other than what I read, I am expecting that the Asians will win. Whoever wins, this is going to the Supreme Court. And with the new makeup of the Supreme Court, it's very possible that the decision may be, well, we allowed race to be a factor for many, many years, but at this point, we're not going to allow it anymore. Hard to know what may come out of that, but this case everybody should follow, not for economic reasons, but political reasons, because it is going to be a landmark case, and it's going to set admission standards for the next generation.
I agree. I'll be following it myself. All right, let's talk about the elections before we close today.
All right, so as I said before, I believe since Kavanaugh, the Republicans are on a roll. The Democrats are putting in gigantic amounts of money into this election between Soros and Steyer and a few other people. I mean, Steyer alone is putting in, I think, $120 million. Bloomberg's putting in $60 or $80 million. I don't know what Soros is putting in. Huge amounts of money. And yet the Senate, the Republicans are doing very well since Kavanaugh and might add 4 or 5 seats, which is more important almost than the House. But I think in 2016 in the fall, I just had a feeling Trump was going to win, and I said so in the rant, because I felt like the polls and the coastal media weren't getting it because they don't go to the real America in the middle of the country. Mm-hmm. And I have the same sense now that something's happening, something's really changed, and the Republicans are going to turn out the vote because people are really upset. And in my mind, what really is going on after Kavanaugh wasn't about Ford, who I feel sorry for because she was just used by the Democrats as throwaway scenery for their show. But what's really going on is what we see on campus today, where the left seems to think, if we don't like you, we can stop you from speaking. If we don't like the name on the building, we can make you change the name of the building, or whatever else they want, and they do it by screaming and protesting. And the academic leaders just cave in and go, oh, yes, that's right, whatever you want. I believe those kids have begun graduating, and then now the ones who showed up at the Capitol building screaming and yelling, and the Democrats have adopted the same strategy. Well, we'll just get the screamers and yellers and protesters, some of which are paid by Soros, to show up and harass and scream and yell and try the same tactics. And to McConnell's credit, and the Republicans' credit, they wouldn't let it happen. And I think this election is all about real America saying, we're not going to put up with this stuff from these kids. You can get away with that on campus, but this is the government, and we're not going to let you decide that there's no freedom of speech, that you can shout down people, that you can harass people in restaurants and airports. And I think that's what this election is really all about. And my sense is people are going to turn out and they're going to vote, and the Republicans are going to hold the House.
You don't see it as a super tight race, or do you see it as turning into something of a landslide because of everybody's backbone is up on, and they're just tired of getting pushed around and called names that just kind of empower them to?
I don't think it's a landslide, because all this gigantic amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars that the Democrats are throwing at, I think it's 60 seats they're trying to flip. The Republicans won't hold on to all that they want to hold on to, but I just think they'll hold on to enough to still control the House. But we'll see. 20 days from now.
Yep, we will. We will. And if they don't, then you think it would be an immediate response through the markets? People will be voting with their money really fast?
I think the potential is there that it could be a real downer. Now, a lot of people say no because they already think it's going to be the blue wave and they've kind of factored that in. I'm not so sure if Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters and Nadler become chairman of their various committees. I mean, imagine Maxine Waters chairman of the banking committee. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
And Nadler, who's a corrupt politician from New York, is going to go after Kavanaugh. I mean, it's going to be ugly.
I agree. All right, Joel, thanks for showing up today. Really appreciate that. I'm really looking forward to our next conversation. That was great.
Thank you.
My pleasure. You've been watching CEO Money with Michael Yorba. Thanks for joining with us on the Joel Rant, or the Ross Rant by Joel Ross. Don't forget, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.